Hello, everyone, and welcome to Math for All, where we strive to make math creative, curious, and inclusive for everyone. I am Heidi Subnani, and hopefully, Molly will be joining us shortly because we've had a little bit of a glitch with our technology. So, hopefully, she will be back here in just a minute. But until then, we would be happy to have you follow us online. And you can do that at Twitter, at Math for All Show, or on YouTube. And we are also available on Facebook as well. We are going to be spending some time this evening talking with Mariah Boudreau, and we're really excited about that.
Yes, we are. I'm sorry that I disappeared. I don't know what happened. So I'm back. And let me introduce Mariah. Mariah is a UVM mathematical science PhD student who was born and raised in Vermont. She works in the Joint Lab and Computation Story Lab, which sits within the Vermont Complex Systems Center. When not sitting at her computer reading papers, she is in the mountains, either hiking or skiing. So let's bring her in.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. We are super excited about this conversation today.
Fantastic.
So let's start with this. What is your math story?
Oh, I feel like this is a long one. And
All right, we're here for it.
Okay, perfect. So, as you said, born and raised here. So, I had a lot of encouragement from a high school math teacher up in BFA St. Albans, who's also my softball coach. And it very much started to cultivate oh, math kind of clicks for you. This is something that I very much enjoy, and just it's bad, it's just good. I was good at it, but it made sense, the processy of going through things in algebra 2 or pre-calc or all the classes that you end up taking in high school. And he encouraged me to join Math League for my high school. So I took part in that, and that was a great experience. And then so I kind of thought, okay, going to college, math is something that I enjoy. I need to go be a math teacher. I thought I wanted to teach at some point in my life. So I went to St. Michael's College, which is also in Vermont. So I've pretty much lived in Vermont my whole life. So went down to St. Mike's. When I started first weekend orientation, the advisor, so I signed up to be a math major. Hadn't signed up for the ed program just yet, but the only two people in this advising meeting was me and one other person and my advisor. And she was like, okay, what are you thinking about for math and whatnot? And the first person went, and he was like, oh, I want to join the ed program, and I want to be a math teacher. And went all about this. And then Joe looked at me, and she was like, what about you? And I was like, well, I was actually thinking the same thing. And she was like, great. That's awesome that you both think you want to be math teachers. However, there is a lot more that you can do with math than just teach it. So she gave me a website, and essentially, I don't exactly remember the website at the moment, but it listed off all the careers that have essentially people who go through a math major or go through that formal math education in college or in a higher education setting, and what they can do with it. The stuff astronauts and all these showy ones, and some other things, but actuarial science and things that get into statistics. And I was like, okay, this is cool. I could adventure into this. And maybe it just happenstance of I didn't get around to going to the ed department and trying to do a double major or whatnot. But I ended up staying in just regular math for all of college. I say regular math. I only stayed with a math major for all of college. And I got to experience the more theoretical, higher level math that not many people do. And like, essentially when you think of like Goodwill Hunting type stuff, that is what we were getting into. And that really was an extremely important and exciting time for me to like see those things and be comfortable being comfortable being uncomfortable in a subject and sticking with it and getting into that higher level of math that has some really cool applications, which I will talk about one of them today. I do also remember sitting in abstract algebra. So not that anyone has to know what abstract algebra is unless you take the class. Sitting in abstract algebra, and I had a lot of math ed majors in this class with me, and one of them raises their hand and says, "Excuse me, when are we ever going to use this? Like as a math teacher?"
The quintessential math student.
The quintessential math question that always comes up. My professor, he's a great professor. I have a lot of great memories with him. And he looked straight at her and said, "You're probably never going to use this subject again, like this particular class subject." And everyone kind of just went quiet. And you're sitting there in class as he keeps going back to the board and starts writing more on the board. And I was like, okay, take a deep breath. Why am I here? Why am I here? And it got down to the point of, I was like, I'm learning how to problem solve. I'm learning how to learn something difficult. I might not use this directly, but it is information that I know I can end up using. So actually that class went from like 20 people in that first semester down to like 5 people in the second semester. And I was in that class, and it was a lovely experience of like jokes. And we would bring like, people would bake cookies and they'd bring them to class. And it was a round table discussion and just very like collaborative and just a very inviting space. And so I had 2 honors theses, or I had 2 theses in college. I did one in like pretty theoretical math. It was essentially like, what's the mathematics of like a Rubik's Cube, and like how you could solve and understand a Rubik's Cube through these like mathematical abstract objects. And my other one, which leads right into our question, was more so about what is the network analysis, or how can you understand epidemiology and like the spread of disease through networks. And I took my first year at St. Mike's, my advisor had an applied graph theory course. Never heard of graph theory. I honestly thought I was going to come to class and have like graph paper and we were going to like do that. Very different, which we'll talk about. Graph theory is very different than what you would expect. And I got to learn about how like the interactions of individuals or items and how you can do math on those types of systems. And then there was a small section of that class that talked about disease, how it integrates into like diseases in biology. And maybe in another life I would have been a doctor, but blood isn't my thing. So,
kind of a requirement.
Exactly. Maybe a small part. And I've always been very eager to like learn about the other fields outside of math. Like I didn't have to take many science classes when I was at St. Mike's. I met my requirements very early on when it came to the life sciences. So I still had that like yearning part of me to like want to learn more about biology and like the physical world around us, especially the human body and like anatomy. I was very interested in that. But I didn't know how math could get me there until that class, which was like, oh, we can understand how people interact and like how like disease spreads like via this type of math. And I've always thought that math is a universal language. It like has universality, and it can maneuver into other fields. Like that's why it's applied math. Like you get the opportunity to go try out some math topics in many different fields. And for me, someone who likes to learn, it's just fun. Like it was so fun to like, I get to use this math skill that I already know or like have cultivated a little bit more. And I get to take some time to learn about something new. So that's been like it's just been a great experience when interacting with math, that I can say, oh, I know how to problem solve, I know how to do this, I have this toolkit. What problems can I then address in like other areas, and like take the time to learn a little bit more about the fundamentals within a different field. So that's what graph theory ended up doing for me. It got me into biology. It got me into understanding how people interacting can like spread a disease, and like how do you take that biological information and then put it into this type of like modeling framework. And that, honestly, that class and that what spun out to be an honors thesis for me brought me here. I asked my advisor at St. Mike's, I was like, this is what I'm interested in. Like, do you know of any grad programs? Because I feel like I'm not done. I just don't feel done with learning, with math, like all these things. And she suggested that I go talk to Chris Danforth, one of my advisors, who is an applied mathematician at UVM. There was a program they also had, or there was an NSF traineeship. So the National Science Foundation has a traineeship program that was in the beginnings of it and taking applications when I was applying to grad school. And that traineeship, that group of people, was emphasizing interdisciplinary work. And they needed people who were on the quantitative side, and they had people who were on the biology side, and they wanted them to interact and like solve these bigger problems together about climate change or population health or evolutionary ecology. And that was super interesting to me. So like applying for grad school, getting in the math program at UVM, and then applying to this traineeship and like having this opportunity to like interact with all of these people who are in biology and like know a lot more about that subject field than I do. And I get to see them weekly just to talk about, we're in a seminar class together just to talk about the woes or the ups and downs of grad school and like how everyone's traversing it right now. But my first year at UVM, we all took a foundations of quantitative reasoning class together. So the biology people got to learn more about the quantitative skills, and the quantitative people got to learn more about the biology. And so like it was very fun to see where some people knew things and some people didn't, and then we all got to work together. But my focus and what I came to UVM to work on and focus a lot more on was network analysis, and how does the world, specifically how do the biology applications, how do we understand the world around us as networks? As you just switch that question.
So that's what I'm here. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, this is the question that we're here to talk about.
Yeah, but before we even talk about this, like I think your story is so interesting because in many ways, your story is the exact opposite of most stories that we hear.
Mm-hmm. Really?
Yeah. I mean, almost in every single way. I mean, for many people that tell their story on this show and other shows that I have listened to, have been, math has not opened doors for them, but has actually closed doors for them. And has not excited them, but has made them feel bad about themselves.
Yeah.
So your story is unique in so many ways because it literally propelled you into the universe. And most people, and I'm not going to say myself included necessarily because I was a math major as well, but I chose math because I was doing education and I had to do something.
Yep.
And so I was like, well, I'm not horrible at it. So, I never had like this amazing experience with math, but it wasn't horrible either. But more people that we talk to than not have had pretty damaging self-worth come out of their mathematical experience. And yours is so exuberant and positive. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's very, it actually is funny. So you saying that I know interacting with people, and you say what you do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I'm like, well, I'm like in grad school. We start out with a slow progression of like, and it's not that it's a confidence thing for me. It's more so like, I know the reactions I will get. So it's like, I'm in grad school. Oh, cool. Like,
What are you in grad school for?
Yeah. What are you in grad school for? And I was like, oh, math. And they're like, whoa. So first that's the whoa.
Yeah.
Like, okay. Like, and then they ask if I want to teach, and I say no. I'd rather go into a research role. And then also in the progression of my whole math story is like, it slowly was like, I know I can teach, and maybe at some point I will go teach as a professor somewhere, maybe, who knows. But the goal is right now to like just keep exploring and keep researching and like understanding the world with math models right now for me. But they ask if I want to teach or if I'm going to teach, and I will say no, I want to do research. And then they're like, well, with what? Or they'll ask, how many years? Oh, so it's a 2-year program, right? Like, or what? How many years in are you? And I'll say 4. So I'm a 4th-year PhD student. And they're like 4, and they're like, wait, master's? Like, you're taking 4 years to do your master's? And I'm like, no. I was like, no. I was like, I'm in a PhD program. And then that's another like, oh. And at some point sprinkled in there, we get the, oh, I hate math.
Yeah.
Or the like, oh, I like, it's either I hate math or I'm bad at math, or all of these negative connotations that they've had. And maybe I just hit the randomness, like those perfect few individuals. But like, even before high school, like 8th grade, we're going and learning through y = mx plus b and like learning all of that part of graphing and functions and whatnot. And I had my 8th grade teacher, I was also in algebra, which you had to like take a test and like take algebra alongside with your regular curriculum for 8th grade at that point. So I kind of knew that like I knew I could like do some higher level math at this point. But my 8th grade teacher in the parent teacher conference was like, I can tell when you are very confident in answering your questions, but you're also willing to try even though you're not as confident, because I'll either like shoot your hand up or I'll be like it was very clear with my body language where I was at in my knowledge. And he was like, but the fact that you did this still and you like knew that you might not be right, that was a very positive experience. And then my pre-calc teacher, my softball coach, he saw, I think he either saw a few glimmers of either potential or whatnot, but he could see how I was thinking about things, and I would offer to do things during class, and he just sit back and he just watch it, and he then like was very encouraging of like, yeah, you know what you're doing, and everybody in the class like knows that you know what you're doing. And so he then kind of just like fueled that fire, which is, again, maybe it's just because you hit the right like teachers, professors, current situations, but yeah, that fire happened, that catalyst just like took off, because I was like, cool, this is a good, I have a plan, I can follow this.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, hearing you talk about it. So people often think that, you know, mathematicians are solo, they work on their own, or they are, you know, just solving a problem and all the experiences that you're talking about are collaborative. It is that idea of that you are working with others and that you're sharing ideas, and that it is not a isolated subject area. And so you could still be a sanguine and do math. Like,
totally.
And so we often don't equate school math with like the real types of math that are happening in the worlds around us. So as we think about that, so talk to us first a little bit about what you mean by network. So if we're thinking about what networks are.
Yeah. I have some visuals if people are visual people.
Fantastic.
If you click on present, and then we can add it in.
Yeah. Maybe it's just slides from my computer. Upload file. Downloads. I just had this ball. There they are. Again, it makes it, this looks like very formal. It's not like super formal. It's just like this is obvious. This is something that I've talked about prior to this, so I had some slides on hand. So yeah, formal. It seems a little formal with the first
Okay.
title, but
It's all right. We get it. We do a lot of PowerPoints.
yeah. So I have some definitions, but before we get to the definitions, I can just show you a picture. Network, so graph theory, this is a graph. Technically, this is a graph. So when people talk about graph theory in mathematics, they're talking about really it's just items, and I believe the definition is on this side, a graph, a network studied as a mathematical object. So it's a collection of objects and they're connected in some shape or form together. And so you can see that by like all of these circles, or you can call them circles, but people will either call them nodes or vertexes or vertices. It's a vertex or vertices. Yeah. When you start introducing these things, it gets a little complicated because people are like, "Are we talking about geometry right now?" And it's like, no, I'm literally talking about dots and lines.
Yeah.
But so nodes are the circles. That's just really like an individual, or it's a representation of an item in some collection of things that you're talking about. It's very ambiguous to start when you're talking about graphs or networks. And then edges, so the lines between the nodes, are the connections between them. And there's many applied applications that a network or graph can represent. This is a very small toy example. I put this on a slide to say this is a graph. This is one example of a graph. It doesn't have to be the graph, or this is an example of a network. It's a very simple network, but that's okay.
And like people would have seen something like that maybe at the beginning of COVID. So I remember seeing something very similar of how COVID spread through a restaurant somewhere. So it's that idea of, person one to person two and all of those connections, and then they leave and how it spreads with them from that point on.
So that's like one great example of this is like, and that actually happens to be like most of my research is like spread of disease analysis. So like, how do we describe transmission networks or contact networks, or just your social network of who you're actually like talking to, or what avenue of, say, a disease spread will that edge connect you by? So say COVID, these edges are, you're talking with someone and you're within 6 feet and you talk with them for more than 15 minutes. Like, there is a connection between the two of you, and there's a possibility that you're sick. It can traverse that edge, traverse that contact transmission line, and infect the next person. Excuse me. If, say, this was a graph representing HIV. HIV is a very different disease biologically than COVID, in more ways than one, within host dynamics and how it's transmitted. So via transmission tree, you would have to be exchanging bodily fluids in whatever manner that is. Say node 4 is a nurse, and there's something that happens and they're taking blood from someone who is HIV positive. Say node 6 is HIV positive. Node 4 is taking blood, and then somehow, some way, they get pricked and there is a contamination that happens. That edge is now present because there's a potential for that disease to essentially traverse and jump from one person to the next. So in terms of networks and what a network is, it's just a collection of objects and how things are connected. So like, depending on your application, those connections and those definitions of like the items or nodes are really dependent on what are the things that are interacting and how are they interacting? Like, what justifies a connection between the two people? Or I say people, two items. A lot of the time we talk about transmission networks, especially in spread of disease. Everyone's talked about COVID. It's kind of like, COVID is a great example because it happened. It's happening. It's going on. People have direct connection to it, so they understand what's going on. But at least in research land, like, some people could escape from COVID with their work. I did work on COVID and like trying to understand it more. So it was a lot of, there's been a lot of like talk about it. I'm happy to continue talking about it, but a lot of people who have been working on it are now starting to be like, okay, we can talk about other diseases now because here they're still present. So that's one example of like what a network is. I think my other slides are more graph theory based, just adjacency things on like how two vertices are adjacent if they have an edge between them. So this is very much like graph theory, like mathematical object talk rather than application, which is how I've always described things. Networks, though, are, again, just different realizations of these graphs, of these connections between people, like cities, like all these other things. And we'll definitely get into the applied aspects of them so that people can understand them tangibly. But there's some idealized networks that we usually will talk about. There's random networks, lattices, small world networks, spatial networks, and scale-free networks. Each of these types of networks describe how individuals are distributed, so like how many connections they have, where they are in space, but then also how each of these idealized networks describe how connections are formed. And so what we mean by that is if you think about a random network, it's just going to be a random slew of these nodes and edges all connected. So the properties of this graph are just defined in a random way. So one way to form a random network, you just connect any two vertices or nodes with probability P. I throw a bunch of dots on a whiteboard. I'm going to start flipping a coin. So I connect these two, flip a coin. If it's heads, yes. If it's tails, no. Go through a bunch of different pairs of that, and I just make this random network. And so some things about this, which paths, links are really like, if I wanted to get from one node or one vertex to the next vertex, on average, how long can I traverse between edges to get there? In a COVID example, how long, if you definitely know that these people were connected and have these possible transmission chains, how many people would it take to get you sick if you knew that you had this like contact path, essentially? So random networks, they on average have short path lengths. You can traverse this network and get to other people, other cities pretty quickly on average. Low clustering coefficient, that means that like it's not like you have individual like say friend groups or like family units that are all interacting and only those. So everyone's kind of like spread out and kind of connected to everybody else. It's pretty much just one big cluster rather than like a bunch of little home units, say, for example. And then the last little point is there's homogeneity in individual level network properties. So that means that each node is actually quite similar to the other nodes around it. So there's just they're homogeneous. There's just a lot of similarity in each individual person, city, item, whatever you might be talking about. That's something good to know. A lattice, another type of network that we can talk about, is really just like very easy example is like a 1D ring, and each vertex or each node is connected to k nearest neighbors. So you can see that B is connected to A, but it's also connected to the neighbors right next to each other. So this particular example is each vertex is connected to its two nearest neighbors. So it's connected to the people that are right next to each other on the circle, and then the people who are right next to them. My advisor is a big hockey fan, and one very easy way to think about this is like if you're sitting in a hockey arena and there's only one line of people all the way around the hockey arena, this network could describe who are the people that you could hear if they were trying to talk to you. So like the conversation network that you have, if you can only really hear like two seats next to you, then those are the only connections, and that's the only information that you can have between all the people in, say, that hockey arena, if they are all sitting around the arena. So what ends up happening with this, it's really highly clustered because you have like each core group of 5 people around the arena are all talking to each other and all like pretty much hanging out. They don't really interact with other people. They're extremely homogeneous at this point. Everyone has the same earshot. That's an assumption that's here. And then average shortest path lengths are long. So if I wanted to get from me all the way directly across to the person all the way across the arena, it's going to take a lot of telephone passing to get if I wanted to actually talk to them or like say anything to them.
And by the time it got there, it wouldn't be what you wanted in the first
place. Oh, yeah. It wouldn't be the same thing.
I would recommend you just walk there.
Yeah, exactly. But how do we, in networks though, how do we traverse that without having to go for a walk? Well, we're going to say we're going to have a small world network instead. And this is talked about a lot. Small, like everyone refers to, oh, it's such a small world. Like I know you and you know me, but like we don't really know other people around us. And so again, with that hockey example, this is as if the person on one side of the arena has their cell phone and is texting the other person on the other side. They have a slight few connections that allow you to traverse across that lattice. And all this does is it pretty much just combines the random network, idealized network, with the lattice network. And you just smush them together because you're going to say, with probability P, I'm going to connect this person to this person, and they're both going to have a phone that they can talk to each other across the arena with. This then makes it so there are there's shorter average path lengths. So like you don't have to just telephone your message all the way around. You can just you can get your telephone message to the person who has the phone and shoot across the way. So it shortens up the path lengths. This is very common in social networks. It's very clustered. You have your friend group, say in your basketball group, and then you have the people that you're in class with, and then you have your work friends, and then you have your family, and you happen to be the connection between all of them. So if someone, say that you work with, like needed to get some crafts or information, or like they're buying a couch from someone in your family, you're that connection. It's not like they have to figure out this whole other roundabout way to get to the information or to the person that they need to. Another great example of this for an applied sense is called 6 degrees of separation. I'm assuming you've heard of like on average.
You've heard of Kevin Bacon.
Bacon numbers are a thing.
Yeah, it's a total like what's your bacon number?
Yeah, what's your bacon number? So do you know the origin of the bacon number?
I don't know the origin of that.
Okay, it's the Erdos number.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I do. Paul Erdos.
So Erdos is very well-known graph theorist, like kind of was very early on in this field. If you have a very low Erdos number, that means you're a lot closer and very well connected with the people who are in graph theory. And so that's all about if you've published a paper with someone who's also published a paper with him, or like how far down the chain are you? Same thing with bacon number is like, are you in a movie with Kevin Bacon? Or are you in a movie with someone who has been in a movie with Kevin Bacon? Like it's exactly. So on average, you're only 6 degrees apart from most people in the world. How this was experimented, or there was an experiment that happened around this where Milgram, he's a social scientist, he took, I think it was probably like over a dozen letters. So handwritten letters, had stamps on them, got to go through the snail mail system, all of that. Sent letters to a bunch of people, random people out in the Midwest, and said, I want you to send this to someone who you think will get it as close as they can to this very particular person who lives outside of Boston. They're in the Midwest, like it's many hundred miles away. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to mail these letters. And that next person got the same exact instructions. Send this to someone who you think will get closer to this particular person outside of Boston. On average, took 6 people to get those letters to the exact person outside of Boston. Wow. It's very cool how like very, very small connections. and personally living in Vermont, like it's all small connections. So
It's only 4.
yeah, pretty much. Exactly. Or you just and that's the other thing, you just got to be connected to that one person who knows everybody. It makes it a lot easier. So small world networks, we end up talking about them a lot. They're used a lot in social contexts. A lot of people within Story Lab and other people who do network work here at the university are usually, especially in a social context, are dealing with small worlds. Spatial networks, this is you think about this like traffic networks, transit networks or transportation. The vertices are embedded in space, or in the nodes, so they can't move. Like all these other networks, like it doesn't necessarily matter where they are. It could, but for spatial networks, it very much depends on where they're located in space. And then the
like airports.
Exactly. Okay. If you've ever looked up a transportation network, like that, some of the coolest pictures of like looking at the hubs of like JFK and Atlanta and LaGuardia and all these other massive airports in either the US or around the world, when you see all their flight paths, that's insane. And yeah, especially from Vermont, if you're flying out of Burlington, you're flying to one of those hubs. Like you have to.
Right.
You really can't get anywhere unless it's like a very direct flight and like one of those small worlds, like you can just traverse. You don't have to like go through other people. So, and we will talk about that as an example. Then finally, skill free. This is like the last like idealized network, which has some like applications. This is kind of gets into the idea of like the rich get richer idea of like there's a lot of hubs. So this can also be a very good network to describe some vertices are very well connected and some vertices are not, or some nodes are not well connected. How these are constructed is you put a node into the system and then you will connect them with other nodes who are already in the system. So one easy way of thinking about that is if you're a very popular node and you have a lot of connections, if a new node gets put in there, they're more likely to be attached to you because you know more people. It's kind of like when you enter a new community, you move to a new town, you're starting to make friends. You usually, on average, will interact and start making friends with people who also know a lot of other people because there's a higher chance of you getting to them and like interacting with them. We call that the friendship paradox, and I do talk about it later on these slides, but friendship paradox is on average, your friends have more friends than you, probabilistically. If you think about it with a network, if you are connected to your friend, there's probably a lot of other people who are also connected there. And because you're following that edge to them, you have a higher probability of them having more people because you went to them. You didn't go to someone else, you went to them. So on average, your friends have more friends than you. I don't know if that's actually ever been tested, if they've counted friends or how they've done that, but it's a fun, interesting topic of.
Well, and I wonder if it only works if your friend is very popular.
Yes.
Yes. If they're not,
exactly.
Then.
If not, then you might. It's on average, your friends have more friends than you because you are connected to them. So that's also kind of comes within scale-free networks. But the rich get richer. It's also the idea within transportation networks, say like in airport hubs, you're more likely to have small pop-up airports, like newer airports. They have connection flights that go to a hub. They're not going to have a connection flight that goes to Burlington. It's very much that they usually will go to a hub because that will get them to more places. Exactly. So yeah, example of graph models or of networks. You got social networks, transportation networks, computer networks, biological networks, disease networks. So like social networks, it'd be people and relationships. You can get lots of data from this via Twitter followers or Facebook friends or your classmates. You can easily map it out. via any of those avenues, but that's like an easy source of data. Twitter, it could be like each node is a profile. If you follow each other, there's an edge between you. Facebook friends, if you're friends on Facebook, then that social connection is set up. Same with classmates.
You get more in many ways by looking at other people's who they follow.
Yep.
How they're connected.
So you can see who they're connected to, and then that technically can like help you get into those jumps across a lattice of social networks. Like if you're looking at your friends, friends. You go down a rabbit hole and you look at one of their friends. Then you say, oh wait, I know this person. I should friend them on Facebook. And then you now have that connection. So that's one cool way to understand the dynamics of social networks.
That kind of makes me wonder if Facebook started based on this theory, or if this theory was not even in their mind until all of a sudden things started happening on Facebook.
The origin, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of, obviously, like there's a whole movie about the origins of Facebook, and everyone wants to talk about how Zuckerberg started it and whatnot. I don't doubt that maybe they started it a certain way and then it came about that, oh wait, this can like, it is a very, I feel like that is something that always ends up happening, is like social constructs come about, or like the way of the world comes about, and then it's like mathematicians always come in there like, oh wait, I know how to describe this with something.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to understand this on a different depth. Like, let me have this model that's like newer, or like something that I've been thinking about, and then apply it to that. I feel like that's a pretty common occurrence.
It also helps in these instances of like, you're not getting anything for free. So when you join any social network, any of these platforms, you're paying with who you bring to the table, or what connections you make, and then what you click on is then used within that sphere as well. And so, for people who will talk about, I can't get more followers, or I can't break past this. Well, it's so much of that is rigged against you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's very, and like, that is something else. Like, those connections won't form unless like you go and look for them, or like Facebook suggests friends for you. Like you all have quite a few connections. I bet you know them. There's a high probability if like a bunch of your mutual friends know someone, you probably know them too. So like, yeah, that algorithm is obviously using this type of structure to its advantage to like connect more people and like get all of that like information spread about, for sure. That's social networks. We can definitely keep talking about that. So you can do measurements on networks. There's like centrality measures, clustering coefficients, things like that. So like a between and centrality is like, who is the person who like connects everybody? Who's the friend in the network who is like the link between why you know other people.
The Julie McCoy. Oh, actually, Mariah might not be old enough to understand that. She's the cruise director on the Love Boat.
Oh, yeah. I think it's a little bit after for me. But something, yes, exactly. Like someone who knows everybody and then can make those connections between everybody. That's between this centrality type of idea. A friendship paradox, you have more friends than you. Your friends have more friends than you. We already talked about that. Transportation networks. These are super, especially like the graphics for these are very interesting to see, like see flight networks and like all the flight paths that happen around the world. So your vertices or your nodes can be destinations or stops. The edge is the travel route. Actually, a very famous problem that came on early on through graph theory before it really got into like applied networks is called the traveling salesman problem. This was an idea that there's a traveling salesman and he has a certain number of locations around the US that he has to go sell his product to. What his question is, what's if there's a cost? So edges can also be weighted in some way. Time, money, all these other things, like especially when you're looking at like flight networks, like what's the cheapest option, but like how many stops do I actually want to take, and like do I care about the actual like time in the air that I'm in, or is it about the money? There's different cost analysis that can be done on a network. But like for the traveling salesman problem, it was just miles. How many miles between two cities? And his question was, if I have all these, I have like 9, 10, 15 cities around the US, what's the shortest distance? What's the shortest trip that I can make to hit every single one of them? It wouldn't make sense to say go from Maine down to Florida, down to LA, back to Omaha, up to Washington and Seattle, so that would be a huge long path. So the point was to minimize his distance traveled, but still hitting all of these. That's very much a path dependent question. Very cool problem. Been done a lot. You can apply a traveling salesman problem to walking around campus, tour guides. The tour guides have to hit all these different locations, but you don't want to make people walk, especially if it's going to be bad weather, or like what's the optimized way to go around a campus, hospital, just traveling in general. So there's that. Road systems, huge with this. Just which interstate do I have to like stay on for the longest, or does it make sense to get off and take Route 7 somewhere? So it's super fun problems when it gets down to that mathematical level, and you get to simplify these transportation networks. Same with flight paths. Trails, I also thought about this, like if it wasn't like if you're on a long trail or you're going hiking, or if you're doing a few trails that end up connecting, like what is the shortest path to get me from here to here, and like actually staying on like a hiking trail. Super fun. Or like ski networks. Like I thought about this in terms of skiing, like what's the fastest way down the mountain? What's the most difficult route that I could take? Depending on if I get dropped off at the top of a mountain, like where do I end up? Very cool, very interesting conversations around transportation networks.
So hold on for 1 second, Mariah. So I'm thinking like an airport, or would those people that have networks that are so insane and busy and complicated, do they have mathematicians working for them to help them figure this out, or is that computer programming that helps? I mean, I can't even imagine them not doing it with computers, but like, do they have to have trained mathematicians to be able to make it work, or is it just a program?
It really depends on. For transportation networks, I actually haven't seen anything like it. Again, most of the time the measures or what we're talking about like are used in a very toy example. The one, I don't necessarily know if it would probably someone who has been trained in math, but if you also think about transportation networks, like you want to find a lot of the time what is of interest for people here, not necessarily like getting everybody the best deal, but it's more like where, if something goes wrong, where do I want it to go wrong, and what measures do we need to have in place so that this network doesn't have a cascade failure. If I flew into, we're going on family vacation down to Florida, flying out of Burlington into JFK down to Florida. Pretty typical for anyone who lives up here. At least typical for my family. And snow delay in JFK. All of JFK was shut down until 8 a.m. That is a huge hub. We were sitting on the runway. We finally got there, sitting on the runway waiting to get taxied in because other flights it was a jammed up system at that point. Things are still moving, but to the point of something happens to JFK and it can't function properly, that is a huge it's not flux problem, but it's just a huge like
Well, I'm sure it impacts the entire world.
exactly. Yeah. And so it cascades.
Mhm.
It's not only like, again, Burlington in a way is somewhat of a dead end of like, it's not like you have a connecting flight through Burlington to get to JFK. It's just one of those like single one flight in to get everywhere else. But like, say it's London to JFK to LAX. If JFK isn't running and you can't get from London to JFK, you're not getting to LA. You're getting rerouted.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, the goal is of transportation networks. This actually gets into a little bit of history with I'm gonna get the president's name wrong. It's Eisenhower because it's the Eisenhower interstate system. Eisenhower set up the interstate system the way he did so that if for some reason a city was under attack or like a huge like massive issue was coming to a city and they needed to evacuate, you need to have multiple routes to get out. If you have one junction or one road getting out of a city, then if anything happens to if the probability of that road going down, everything else falls apart. So,
which is why we're in trouble in Boston, because our system was designed in the colonial era, and it's a bunch of like paved cow paths all through the city. So you are not getting out.
Yeah. So and that's a huge like understanding cascade failures in networks. It's not necessarily a mathematician sitting there, but it's more like anyone has like a risk management role. If snow hits JFK, how are we fixing it? Because if it goes down, that affects however many flights coming in, however many people trying to get to other places, however many bags. There's a lot of bodies. There's a lot of things that are then impeded.
And there's a lot of angry people.
Same thing with power systems. It happened when Texas had that huge ice storm. If they have a cascade failure at one point and that transformer or that area of the power grid is very reliant to spread power to the rest of the cities, counties, whatever, that part of the network is essentially like just out of commission. Like you can't do anything about it until you fix that central node or central vertex or transformer or airport. So there's a huge necessity to have these redundancies in this system, because you don't want to be, if you are the only hub, that's a huge risk if anything were to go wrong with that hub. But
yeah.
This is insane. But like, it makes me kind of wonder, what are some jobs that come out of this understanding of systems that might, like a mathematician, like actually kind of going back to what your professor kind of was trying to make you understand, that there are other jobs that mathematicians can do. But if we're looking at this idea specifically of networks, what are some of the jobs that people can do? I mean, I can see where there would be a million of them within the medical community.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, even just what you're studying is massive, but what are some other things?
So there's a whole multitude. If I was just thinking about like computer networks, like computer architecture, it's computer architecture, but also like how the World Wide Web interacts. Like there's hyperlinks between every single like all these different websites on the internet. You want to optimize and allow your website to be viewed the most, or like your profile influencer. You gotta like have those connections. You just have to have your breadth of connections everywhere. You can't have any like super long paths getting to one place or the other. City designers, definitely. Like, again, it's a lot of risk management, especially in transportation networks. Math modeling for in the medical field, like networks get applied to brain connectivity. Like you're on a neuronal network. There's research on how Alzheimer's connects to the connectivity of neurons in your brain. Like we're getting into like the biological research around like connectivity, which is all that networks are. It's how things are interconnected. Spread of disease is like we had all of these intervention strategies of like, okay, well, take these people out of this network because we're going to immunize them and like and keep giving them boosters to make sure that they don't stay in that contact network, or like keep people at home, like cut off those connections, like try not to have as many people see others. So it ends up being a lot of risk management, more so because you have to deal with the uncertainty that could occur on this current network structure that we are dealing with, whether it be social networks, like in our contact structures, or like in your brain. Like is it going to take you longer to think about something if like a surgery like cuts off one of those like connections in your brain? Like that's something we have to think about.
So it's interesting because I feel like just thinking about COVID alone, the people who had to make decisions on what the next step was going to be, which was a daily television occurrence, were being advised by, they're in the end making the decision and announcing it and whatever, but they are being advised by many, many people, some of whom would be mathematicians, right? Yep. I mean, and if it wasn't a mathematician is conferring with somebody who is going to relay that information. I mean,
there was a lot of, arguably, it was kind of funny to have armchair epidemiologists in COVID. There was actually a website called 538 that had, because many different models were coming out of each state, and 538 listed all of them and gave trajectories on all of them. And this gets into an area of math that I think is extremely important, is like similar to like the opportunity for people to interact with math and have good interactions with people who are in it, or in like diversify STEM and like all of these things. Like there's a lot of bias that given how I'm grown up, the models that I've interacted with, the actual knowledge that I have is going to shape the way that I think a system might look like. And then how do I predict on that? How do I like try to gain information on that? So every single person who makes their own model is like, already putting all of their assumptions and their biases into it. So it's very helpful to like have people, one, mirroring and looking at your model and saying, okay, well, maybe you should emphasize this a little bit more. Maybe you should emphasize this. And like policymakers and people who are making decisions about COVID or like other intervention strategies for all these other possible like infectious diseases, like mathematicians like have a resource for us to understand the system and like think about what could happen. But I don't know any of that unless people like are saying, well, how much is it actually going to cost to like get these vaccines out to people? What is a reasonable number of people to be vaccinated in a week? Another thing that you consider a very, very complex network and complex system is how the world just interacts with making one single decision. Say in the US or any other country, one single decision. You have the cost of it for its economic purposes. What is it going to do policy-wise? What actual influences do we have, either with people who are in power, the majority rules around it? Like all of these factors take so much, like all of them are, and they're so messy. Everything is so messy. And it's so hard to understand because it's like, okay, well, it has to be good then, right? If like you're gonna do something, it's gonna make everyone's lives better. But like there's a whole nother section of people who like maybe it won't make their lives better, maybe it'll make it worse. Like, how do you figure that out? And it's so much give and take of like it would have made sense. I say this very like it wouldn't have made sense, but like easiest thing in COVID, simplest thing that could have happened, everybody stays home for like a month. No one goes out, no one does anything. That's not possible. Things need to run. The other complex systems of the world like won't function unless those things are happening. Power grid goes down. Oh, everybody's home. Who's gonna go fix it? Like the world can't stop. And then the complex systems that are all interacting and all these networks and all these people, and like you get into this macro system of like you have the people, the transportation network really relies on the power network, and then like all these other things. But then within all of those, like the transportation network, you have the instances of road networks, the instances of the airport. Like economically, like airport and travel is huge. We can go down a huge.
I know. I mean, we don't have time to go down all those roads tonight. Oh my goodness.
So it's how can we understand the world as networks? They're everywhere. It just depends on what part of the world you want to look at and how big of a chunk do you want to chew on.
Right.
Well, and I think it is important for people to realize too. We say sometimes that math is like it's just numbers. There's always bias in whatever it is. Like it's the interpretation of those numbers. There's nothing that is purely without bias. And I think
numbers don't lie, but people lie.
Yeah, I mean, people not lie in their interpretation of it. But so how can people learn more about the work that you're doing? We have a couple of ways, but
so particular work that I'm doing, my profile on one of my lab's websites, so that's the joint lab at github.io. If you go down to the people, I am there, Mariah Boudreau. That website has all of the papers or just presentations, concepts, whatever type of media associated with me and other people who in my lab who work on similar things and extremely cool projects. So you can look at that. I also have Twitter. You can find me at Mariah Boudreau on Twitter. I'm not super active on it, but I will see if I'm either contacted or if you have something cool to share. That is one way to connect with me. I think my email is also available. I don't know if you have it on
I didn't put it on there because we like to protect your privacy.
Also, that would be great too. It's in presentations, you're used to just like, okay, here's my email if you have any questions. But I forget that this is also
right. And if they go, they can find you at your website.
Yeah, if you go to any of the other places, there are ways to get in touch with me. But obviously, I had a lot more slides. Not that we have to get to them, but like, there's so much fun aspects to talk about here.
Yeah.
Well, we're super grateful to learn more about what real life mathematicians do in today's world. And I think it's always great for teachers to understand what's going on really in the math world. I mean, you're preparing kids for, hopefully some of your kids will go into STEM, and maybe somebody will be a future Mariah Boudreau.
Yeah, we definitely need to have these conversations. I had a quick conversation with my one of my brother's college roommates, and I was telling him what I was doing, spread of disease analysis, all this network stuff, and he's like, "Where was that math when I was going through school?" He's like, "Why are these cool problems coming about?" And I was like, "You just gotta get calculus. You just gotta get through."
Well, and some of these things kids can understand. Like the basic ideas of and get them interested in enough to follow it through later on. And so I think that's, sometimes the eliteness of math can come about in that we withhold the good stuff, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
so no, we're gonna
until
make you learn, all
Yeah.
of these other things, but we're gonna hold the really interesting stuff for later. And I think
Exactly.
we would get more people interested in doing that if we worked slightly in a different way. But we really appreciate you being here and sharing the work that you are doing, and it's just so very exciting.
Yeah.
It's
Thank you
great.
so much for being here, Mariah. This is a great
Absolutely.
conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity and the space.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right. Thanks. Well, that was interesting.
I know.
Goodness. So fun. So fun. So we only have a few shows left. I
We
can't
do.
even believe we're nearing the end of the year. And next time we're going to be talking with Tyrone Martinez Black. And then that is on April 26th.
Yep, that's on April 26th. And so until then, we hope that you keep math creative, curious, and inclusive for everyone. Good night.
Bye.